The vacuum-sealed brick of drugs in my son's stroller wasn't mine. My mother-in-law's fingers clawed at the bag. She planted it. The doorbell rang, and my hands shook as I shoved the stroller into the closet. Detective Reed's voice cut through the door. "Ma'am, we have a warrant." One wrong move, and I lose Leo forever. The lock clicked. My breath stopped. The drugs weren't the worst part. It was the look on Evelyn's face when she realized I'd figured her out. Too late. Sarah Miller's knees hit the hardwood floor of the nursery with a dull thud that vibrated up her spine. The air in the room was thick, tasting of lemon wax and the metallic tang of the radiator. She scrubbed the floorboards with a rhythmic, frantic energy, the bristles of the brush screeching against the wood. Every few seconds, she reached into her pocket, her fingers brushing the smooth, laminated edge of the card, listing the chemical components of Robert's final medications. Acetaminophen, oxycodone, diazepam, she whispered. The words a low-frequency hum intended to keep her heart from leaping out of her chest. Behind her, the floorboards groaned under a familiar, heavy tread. Evelyn Miller stood in the doorway, the silhouette of her charcoal suit sharp against the pale blue wallpaper. The older woman didn't enter. She lingered on the threshold, her signet ring tapping against the doorframe. Tap, 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 tap. The sound was a gavel, a judgment. Evelyn's presence brought with her the scent of expensive lilies and the chilling draft of a cellar. "The social worker will be here in 20 minutes, Sarah," Evelyn said, her voice a perfectly modulated stream of cold air. "We find it concerning that you are still on your hands and knees. It suggests a certain lack of stability. A mother who cannot manage a schedule can hardly be expected to manage a child's future." Sarah didn't look up. She focused on a microscopic speck of dust near the baseboard. "Leo is clean, the house is clean, and the records are in order, Evelyn. I don't need a lecture on management." "We are not lecturing," Evelyn replied, her eyes unlinking, tracking the movement of Sarah's frantic hands. "We are observing, and what we see is a woman unraveling in the shadow of a tragedy she couldn't prevent. Perhaps the Miller legacy requires a firmer hand than yours." The tension in the room was a physical weight, a pressure behind Sarah's eyes. She stood up, her muscles screaming, and moved toward the corner where Leo's stroller sat. She needed to check the diaper bag one last time, to ensure every bottle was sealed and every cloth was white. As she reached into the mesh pocket of the stroller, her hand hit something that didn't belong. It wasn't the soft give of a diaper or the crinkle of a wipe package. It was hard, heavy, and cold. Sarah's breath hitched. She pulled back the fabric, her heart hammering like a trapped bird against her ribs. Tucked deep into the frame of the stroller was a vacuum-sealed brick. The plastic was thick, reflecting the nursery's soft light. And through the clear casing, she saw the compressed, crystalline white powder, high-grade narcotics, a quantity that didn't just mean trouble. It meant a lifetime behind bars. "What is that?" Evelyn's voice sliced through the silence. She was suddenly across the room, her movement predatory and silent. "I don't know," Sarah gasped, her mind racing through chemical structures, trying to find a logic that wasn't there. "This isn't mine. I've never seen this." Evelyn lunged. Her hand, surprisingly strong for a woman of her age, clamped onto the strap of the diaper bag. "Give it to me, Sarah. You're clearly in no state to handle this. This is the proof we needed." "No." Sarah shoved her shoulder into Evelyn's chest, a desperate, clumsy move. The older woman didn't stumble. She clawed at Sarah's face, her manicured nails catching the skin near Sarah's eye. The smell of lilies was suffocating now, mixed with the salt of Sarah's own sweat. They struggled in the center of the room, the stroller rocking precariously between them. Sarah could see the madness in Evelyn's eyes, a cold, aristocratic rage that saw Sarah not as a person, but as an obstacle to be cleared from the Miller bloodline. Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline, a chemical spike that sharpened her vision. She twisted her body, using her weight to break Evelyn's grip. With a sharp grunt, she shoved the stroller toward the walk-in closet. The wheels squealed on the wood. Sarah dived after it, her fingers finding the heavy brass handle of the closet door. She slammed it shut, the click of the latch sounding like a gunshot in the quiet house. She fumbled with the key, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped it. The metal bit into her palm as she forced it into the lock and turned it. Click, secured. She leaned her forehead against the cold wood of the door, her lungs burning. "You think a wooden door will protect you?" Evelyn's voice was a whisper now, coming from just inches away on the other side of the panel. "The world is about to fall in on you, Sarah, and we will be the ones left standing with the boy." At that exact moment, the doorbell rang. The sound echoed through the sterile hallway, a rhythmic, electronic chime that signaled the arrival of the end. Sarah wiped her face with the back of her hand, feeling the sting of the scratch Evelyn had left. She looked at her reflection in the nursery mirror. Her hair was a bird's nest, her eyes wide and bloodshot. She looked exactly like the unstable mother Evelyn had described. She smoothed her shirt, her mind screaming hydrocodone, lorazepam, warfarin, as she walked toward the front door. Every step felt like walking through deep water. Through the frosted glass of the entry, she saw two silhouettes. One was the slight, upright form of Jennifer Martinez, the social worker. The other was a broad-shouldered man in a suit that looked a size too small. Sarah opened the door. The humid American summer air rushed in, but it brought no relief. "Mrs. Miller?" the man asked. He didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped into the foyer, his eyes immediately scanning the exits. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a badge. "I'm Detective Marcus Reed. This is Jennifer Martinez from Child Protective Services." "Is there a problem?" Sarah asked, her voice cracking. Reed didn't sit. He stood by the door, his back to the wall, his eyes darting to the hallway. "We received an anonymous tip this morning, Mrs. Miller. A very specific report claiming this property is being used for the storage and distribution of controlled substances. Given the nature of the tip and the presence of a minor, we have a warrant to search the premises immediately." The plot twist hit Sarah like a physical blow to the stomach. This wasn't a routine check. It was a coordinated strike. She looked past Reed to Evelyn, who was descending the stairs with the grace of a queen, a mask of fragile terror perfectly fixed to her face. "Oh, thank God you're here, Detective," Evelyn cried, her voice trembling. "I was so worried. I didn't want to believe it. But Sarah has been acting so strangely." The trap had snapped shut. Evelyn hadn't just planted the drugs. She had called the police herself, ensuring that Sarah would be hauled away in handcuffs in front of her son. Detective Reed didn't waste time. He unfolded a piece of paper, the warrant, and the light from the flickering hallway bulb made the ink look like fresh blood. "We'll start with the ground floor," he said, his voice like grinding stone. "If you'll lead the way, Mrs. Miller." Sarah felt the walls of her own home closing in. The house, once a sanctuary, was now a cage. She turned toward the hallway, her mind racing. She had to keep him away from the nursery. She had to find a way to make the chemistry of this situation change before the reaction became irreversible. "The kitchen is this way," Sarah said, her voice a forced, brittle calm. "We can start there. I was just preparing some food for Leo." "We'll get to the kitchen," Reed replied, his eyes narrowing as he watched her shaking hands. But the tip mentioned the upstairs, specifically the child's room. "Let's head up." They began the climb. Sarah counted the stairs under her breath, just as Robert used to do. 1, 2, 3. Each step was a second closer to the end of her life as she knew it. The hallway felt longer than usual, the white walls erasing all sense of depth. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the house. A heavy, gold-framed portrait of Robert, which had hung securely for years, detached from the wall. It hit the floor with a violence that shattered the glass into 1,000 glittering shards, blocking the narrow neck of the hallway. "Stay back," Reed shouted, putting a hand on Jennifer's arm. The shattered glass created a jagged barrier. In the confusion, Sarah saw movement at the back of the house. Gus, Evelyn's driver, had entered through the kitchen door. He didn't look like a driver now. He looked like a predator. He caught Sarah's eye, and before she could scream, he lunged forward, his massive hand wrapping around her upper arm with crushing force. "Come with me," Gus hissed, his breath smelling of stale coffee and tobacco. He began to drag her toward the basement door, away from the detective's line of sight. "The boss wants you out of the way while they find the stash," Sarah fought, her heels skidding on the linoleum. She saw a heavy decorative vase on the hallway table. A gift from Evelyn, irony of ironies. She reached out, her fingers catching the cool ceramic. She swung it with every ounce of terror and maternal rage she possessed. The vase connected with the side of Gus's head with a sickening thud. He let out a choked groan and slumped to the floor, blood beginning to seep into the white carpet. Sarah didn't wait to see if he was breathing. She bolted into the kitchen, her lungs gasping for air. On the counter sat Evelyn's designer handbag, abandoned in the chaos. Sarah lunged for it, her fingers diving into the silk lining. She pulled out a small black burner phone. The screen was still glowing. On it was the active call log to the police tip line and a gallery of photos. Sarah scrolled, her heart stopping. There were photos of the stroller, photos of the drugs tucked into the frame, time-stamped from 3 hours ago while Sarah had been at the grocery store. Subverted beat 2.6. Sarah stared at the glowing screen of the burner phone, her thumb hovering over the glass. This was it. This was the smoking gun she needed to prove Evelyn's treachery. The logic was undeniable. If she showed Detective Reed the phone, the photos would prove the drugs were planted. The timestamps showed the images were taken when Sarah wasn't even in the house. She felt a surge of triumph, a rush of oxygen to her brain. She would walk out to the hallway, hand this device to Reed, and watch the handcuffs click onto Evelyn's wrists instead of her own. It was the smart move, the only move. "Detective," Sarah called out, her voice regaining its strength. "I have something you need to see. I have proof." She stepped back into the hallway, holding the phone aloft like a trophy. Evelyn was standing by the shattered portrait, her face pale, her eyes darting between Sarah and the detective. For a second, Sarah saw genuine fear in the older woman's expression. It felt like victory. Detective Reed stepped over the glass, his face unreadable. "What is that, Mrs. Miller?" "It's a burner phone," Sarah said, the words tumbling out. "It's Evelyn's. She used it to call in the tip. And look at the photos. She took pictures of the drugs in the stroller before she called you. She planted them. The timestamps prove I wasn't here." Reed took the phone, his gloved fingers tapping the screen. He scrolled through the images, his jaw tightening. Jennifer, the social worker, leaned in to look, her brow furrowed. Sarah felt her shoulders drop for the first time in hours. The crisis was over. The truth was out. "This is very interesting," Reed said slowly. He turned the phone toward Jennifer. "Look at the metadata on these photos, Jennifer. What do you see?" Jennifer squinted at the small text. "The upload logs. They're linked to a cloud account. Registered to Sarah Miller?" Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What? No, that's impossible." Reed's gaze turned ice cold. "Mrs. Miller, this phone isn't just a camera. It's synced to your personal laptop. And these photos weren't just taken. They were part of a digital inventory. According to the internal logs, this device has been used to track product for the last 3 months." The world tilted. Sarah reached for the wall to steady herself. No, she must have set that up. She's wealthy. She has people who can... "And the tip," Reed continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "The tip didn't come from this phone. We traced the call to a public payphone 3 blocks from your doctor's office. But this phone contains a series of draft messages to a known distributor in the city. Messages sent from your home network." Evelyn stepped forward, her face crumpling into a mask of maternal heartbreak. "Oh, Sarah, I knew you were struggling with the loss of Robert. But to turn the nursery into a warehouse? How could you?" Sarah looked at the phone in Reed's hand. The proof she had found wasn't her salvation. It was the final, perfectly engineered nail in her coffin. Evelyn hadn't just planted physical drugs. She had built a digital ghost of Sarah's life, a trail of breadcrumbs that led straight to a prison cell. By finding the phone and presenting it to the police, Sarah hadn't proven her innocence. She had hand-delivered the evidence of her own sophisticated criminal enterprise. She was no longer just a suspect. She was a kingpin in the making. "I didn't," Sarah whispered. But the words felt thin, like smoke. "Handcuff her," Reed ordered. And the sound of the metal ratcheting shut was the only sound in the world. The heat in the house was becoming unbearable. The thermostat, locked behind its plexiglass shield, seemed to be climbing on its own. Sarah felt the sweat slicking her palms as Reed led her back toward the kitchen. Her mind was a chaotic blur of chemical formulas and legal definitions. But one fact remained clear. The K-9 unit was on its way. "Detective, please," Sarah pleaded, her voice a low hum. "You have to listen to the chemistry of this. If I were moving that kind of volume, there would be residue. My pH levels..." "Save it for the station," Reed snapped. He looked at her shaking hands, his suspicion deepening. "You're acting like someone who's either high or hiding something. Which is it?" Sarah knew she needed a distraction. She looked at the stove. A tray of muffins she had prepared for the visit sat on the counter. She lunged forward, sliding the tray into the oven and cranking the dial to its maximum setting. "What are you doing?" Jennifer asked, startled. "Leo needs to eat," Sarah lied, her heart pounding. "I forgot to finish these." Within minutes, the smell of burning sugar and flour filled the kitchen. A thick, gray smoke began to curl out of the oven vents. The smoke alarm, a high-pitched, agonizing shriek, erupted from the ceiling. The sound vibrated through Sarah's teeth, a mechanical wail that demanded attention. "Damn it!" Reed shouted, coughing as the haze thickened. "Get the kid out of here!" In the confusion, Evelyn cornered Sarah near the stove. The smoke swirled around them, turning the kitchen into a ghost world of gray shadows. Evelyn's hand shot out, pinning Sarah against the hot metal of the oven. You think a little smoke will save you? Evelyn hissed, her eyes wild. The dog is here, Sarah. I can hear the van pulling up. It doesn't matter what you burn. The scent is already in the wood. It's in the fabric. It's in your very skin. Sarah looked through the window. A black SUV had pulled into the driveway. A man in a tactical vest was leading a German shepherd toward the porch. The dog was focused, its head low, its tail rigid. The K9 is on site, Reed announced over the roar of the alarm. Jennifer, take the baby to the porch. We're doing a final sweep with the dog. The social worker reached for the handle of the nursery closet. Sarah stood frozen. The key was in her pocket, but Reed had already pulled a heavy master key from his belt. Open it, Reed commanded. The dog began to bark the moment it hit the hallway. It was a deep, territorial sound that drowned out the alarm. The animal lunged toward the nursery door, its claws scratching at the floorboards. It knew. It smelled the vacuum-sealed brick, even through the plastic. Fire department is here, a voice shouted from the front door. Firefighters in heavy yellow gear pushed into the hallway, their presence adding to the chaos. The smoke from the muffins had triggered a full emergency response. In the swirling gray mist and the flash of red lights from the street, Sarah saw her one and only chance. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the closet key. She moved with the precision of a surgeon. While the firefighters pushed past Evelyn and the detective, Sarah slipped into the nursery. She unlocked the closet, grabbed the brick of narcotics from the stroller, and tucked it under her shirt. She stepped back into the hallway, her heart nearly stopping as she bumped into Evelyn. The older woman was clutching her luxury tote bag, her face pale with fury. "What are you doing?" Evelyn demanded. Sarah didn't answer. As a firefighter bumped into them, Sarah's hands moved with practiced grace, the same grace she used to handle delicate glass vials in the lab. She slipped the brick into the torn interior lining of Evelyn's bag, pushing it deep into the silk folds next to the burner phone. The K9 handler fought to keep the dog under control. The animal was frantic now, but it wasn't pulling toward the closet anymore. It pivoted, its nose hitting the air with a series of wet snorts. It lunged toward Evelyn. "Get that animal away from me!" Evelyn shrieked. The dog wouldn't be moved. It sat back on its haunches and let out a long, clear howl, its eyes fixed on Evelyn's tote bag. Detective Reed's expression shifted from suspicion to cold realization. He stepped toward Evelyn. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see that bag." "This is preposterous," Evelyn cried. "I am a miller. This woman is the one you want." Reed didn't argue. He took the bag and reached into the lining. He pulled out the vacuum-sealed brick. Then he pulled out the burner phone. "Wait," Evelyn gasped, her composure finally shattering. That was supposed to be in the closet. I put it." She stopped, but it was too late. The words were out. Subverted beat 4.3. Evelyn Miller's face underwent a terrifying transformation. The aristocratic mask didn't just slip. It dissolved into a mask of pure, vitriolic madness. As Detective Reed's grip tightened on her arm, she began to scream. It wasn't a plea for mercy. It was a confession. "I had to," she shrieked, her voice echoing off the sterile hallway walls. "I had to save the boy. Robert was weak. He was a hollow shell. I found his stash months ago, hidden behind the baseboards, like a common addict. I kept it to protect the name, but then I realized I could use it to prune the rot from this family. You," she pointed a trembling finger at Sarah, "you are the rot. You are the mediocrity that would have dragged my grandson into the gutter." The social worker, Jennifer, stood frozen. clutching Leo. The firefighters paused, their axes heavy in their hands. The silence that followed Evelyn's outburst was more deafening than the smoke alarm. Sarah stood tall, her breath coming in slow, even cycles. The chemistry of the truth, Evelyn. It always reacts eventually. She expected a moment of triumph. She expected Jennifer to hand her the baby and apologize. She expected Reed to tip his hat and lead the villain away. But as the police led a sobbing, broken Evelyn out the front door, the atmosphere in the room didn't lighten. It curdled. Jennifer Martinez looked at Sarah, but there was no warmth in her eyes. There was only a profound, clinical disgust. "You did this," Jennifer whispered. "You pushed a 60-year-old woman to a psychotic break in front of child services. You turned your own home into a crime scene to settle a score." "She tried to frame me," Sarah cried. "She planted drugs in my son's stroller." "And you," Reed said, stepping back into the room, his face like granite. "You played the game right along with her. You manipulated evidence. You started a fire in a house with an infant. And you used the emergency services as a distraction for a sleight of hand trick. You think you're the hero here, Sarah? You're just the miller who was smart enough not to get caught with the bag." Jennifer began writing in her notebook, the scratch of the pen sounding like a death sentence. "The Miller name is synonymous with scandal now. The press will be here in an hour. The neighborhood, the school boards. They won't care who planted what. They'll only remember the drugs, the fire, and the grandmother being hauled off in a straitjacket." Sarah looked around her pristine nursery. The purification she had hoped for had backfired. By exposing Evelyn's madness so publicly, she hadn't saved her reputation. She had permanently stained it. She was no longer Sarah Miller, the grieving widow. She was the woman who had brought down a dynasty in a cloud of smoke and narcotics. The shame was a chemical bond that couldn't be broken. "I'm recommending an emergency placement for Leo," Jennifer said, not looking up, "until a full psychological evaluation of the mother can be completed. This environment is toxic." Sarah watched as they took her son. She stood on the porch, the Miller's shadow finally lifted, but the light that replaced it was cold, harsh, and utterly lonely. The sirens faded into the quiet suburban morning, leaving her with nothing but the smell of scorched dust and the haunting echo of a child's low, vibrating hum. She was free, but she was alone. The end. Do not proceed past this point.